All right, so let's put down those glossy travel brochures for a sec, and let's get real about travel. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the places that maybe aren't as picture perfect as they seem in the postcards. The spots where adventure could come, with a little side of risk. I mean, we all have those dream destinations, right? Those places we've always wanted to visit.
Yeah.
But do you ever actually stop and think about the potential risks? I'll admit, I can get so caught up in just the excitement of going someplace new that I forget to even think about the practical stuff, let alone the fact that it might not be, well, totally safe. So to help us navigate through all of that, we're going to be looking at a list from 10 most today. They've got all kinds of fascinating top 10 lists, and this one is the 10 most dangerous tourist destinations in the world. It was published back in 2020.
Yeah, and it's super important to remember that things can change. I mean, safety situations can shift all the time. So this list is really just a snapshot from that year, not a, permanent ranking. But I think it gives us a good place to start, to talk about some of the risks that travelers might face.
Exactly. It's a starting point for a deeper conversation. So let's jump right in. The list kicks off with a city that might actually surprise some people. Bogota, Colombia, number 10. Now, Bogota, it's got a little bit of a past, right? I think a lot of people hear Bogota and they immediately think Pablo Escobar, drug cartels, that kind of thing. But the article makes a point of saying that it's actually gone through some big changes in recent years.
It really has. I mean, it's a great example of a city that's really working to change its reputation. And if you stick to, the typical tourist areas, Bogota is considered pretty safe these days. But it is a good reminder that even when positive change happens, the past can still kind of have an influence. Sometimes, you might see things like social tensions or areas where you still need to be extra cautious.
Okay, so Bogota maybe moving up in the world when it comes to safe travel. But next up, we've got a city that, well, it's known for eating a little bit of street smarts. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Number 9 on the list. Rio, with its beaches and carnival, it's a dream for a lot of people. But the article warns that theft and street crime, pretty common there.
Yeah, Rio is definitely a place where you need to be super aware of your stuff. Petty theft, pickpocketing, those are unfortunately kind of part of the landscape, especially in those crowded tourist areas. It's not about avoiding Rio altogether. It's more about just adjusting how you act to minimize risk. Keep your valuables close, be mindful of who's around you, and maybe avoid flashing expensive jewelry or electronics.
A little bit of street smarts goes a long way.
Right.
Okay, our next stop takes us to a region where the dangers are, they're more complicated. Number 8, we have Israel. Now, the article says that the main concern here, it isn't so much about petty crime, it's more about political tensions and the possibility of terrorism.
Yeah, the situation in Israel, it's definitely complex, and unfortunately it's a place where things can change very quickly. So that doesn't mean people shouldn't visit, but it does mean that travelers need to be really tuned in to what's going on politically and any travel advisories their government might have issued.
It's definitely one of those places where staying informed is really key.
Okay.
Okay, next up, we're heading to Asia. Bangkok, Thailand. Number 7 on the list. Bangkok is amazing. It's just incredible energy, the markets, the street food, those beautiful temples. But the article points out that, well, there's a bit of a darker side too. Street scams, burglary, that kind of thing.
Right, and what's especially worrying is that the article mentions that sometimes police corruption can make it hard to report those crimes. It really highlights how important it is to be careful. Choose transportation that's reputable. Be wary of people who seem, maybe a little too friendly, offering you deals that sound too good to be true. And I think, most importantly, keep your belongings safe. I mean, really safe, all the time. Simple precautions can make a huge difference.
Okay, noted. All right, at number 6, we've got a place that I think is on a lot of bucket lists, mine included, Peru. Now, Machu Picchu, those ruins, absolutely breathtaking. But the article points out that if you go beyond those well-traveled paths, there are some things to watch out for, specifically drug cartels and terrorist groups, particularly in those more remote areas.
Yeah, it's a reminder that you can have incredible beauty and danger in the same place. And while Peru offers so much to see and do, if you're going off the beaten track, you really need to do your research. Look into transportation options that are safe and reliable, and honestly, consider sticking to those more established tourist routes, especially if you're traveling alone.
Good advice. Next, we're going to another amazing city, Mumbai, India, at number 5 on the list. Mumbai, it's known for its energy, its history, Bollywood. But like a lot of big cities, it also has its share of danger.
The article talks specifically about harassment and mugging as potential risks, especially for people who are traveling solo. And that's not just Mumbai, of course. It's something to be aware of in a lot of large cities. The key is being aware of your surroundings, especially at night, and avoiding walking alone in places that are poorly lit or deserted.
Solid advice. All right, our next stop is a place that's just stunning. Cape Town, South Africa. Number 4 on our list, you've got Table Mountain, the coastline, the wineries. It seems like it has it all. But as the article reminds us, even paradise can have a bit of a dark side.
Sadly, Cape Town does have a high crime rate, and that can impact even the most idyllic vacation. Now, that doesn't mean you should avoid it, but it does mean being really cautious, especially if you're going outside those main tourist zones. Maybe look into using reputable tour operators for excursions, and just be really mindful of your surroundings at all times.
Okay, we're really getting into it now. At number 3, we actually have 2 destinations, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Now, when I think of the Caribbean, I think beaches, rum cocktails, relaxation. But it seems like even paradise has its risks.
You're right. And while robbery might not be as common in these island nations, compared to some of the other places we've talked about, the article does point out some other concerns. Things like kidnapping, credit card fraud, and assault.
It's a good reminder that danger can take a lot of forms. And it's not always about what you see, but about what you might not be aware of. Being careful with your finances, avoiding isolated areas, even in a place that seems idyllic. That's really important. Okay, we're down to the final 2. At number 2, we have Kingston, Jamaica, known for its reggae music, those laid-back island vibes. Doesn't exactly seem like it belongs on a list like this.
I know, right? But the article says that beneath those chill beach days, there's a reality of robbery, drug trade activity, and the potential for assault.
It's interesting how even places that have a reputation for being relaxed can still have those underlying risks. This really does show how important it is to do your research, no matter where you're going. And finally, the destination that landed the number 1 spot on this list is Acapulco, Mexico.
This one, unfortunately, isn't too surprising. Acapulco was actually ranked the 3rd most violent city in the world in 2020. It's really sad, considering its history as a glamorous destination.
It's a tough reminder that even those places that are steeped in tourism can be affected by changes in crime and violence. And this isn't just about avoiding certain cities or countries. It's about understanding that risk exists everywhere.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this list is that the dangers are so different from place to place. Some are rooted in political instability, others in, socioeconomic issues, and then you have organized crime. It's like this whole tapestry of risk woven into the fabric of these destinations.
So what does all this mean for our listeners who want to explore the world, but without constantly having to look over their shoulders? Well, we'll be right back to talk about just that. Stay tuned.
Like we always say, knowledge is power, right? The more you know about potential risks, the more rewarding the whole travel experience can be.
I totally agree with that. It's about being a savvy traveler, not letting fear stop you from doing anything, but just being informed enough to make good decisions.
Yeah.
And really enjoy the trip. So, beyond just looking at lists like this one, what are some practical things people can do to stay safe when they're traveling?
Well, the first thing, and I think this is the most important, make research your travel buddy. Before you even think about booking flights or hotels, dive into some good, reliable sources of information.
Okay, like what kind of sources are we talking about?
Start with those official travel advisories. The ones issued by your government. They've got up-to-date information on safety and security conditions for destinations all over the world. You'd be surprised how detailed they can be. Sometimes they even tell you specific areas within a city or region to be extra cautious in.
Yeah, those are really helpful. I always check those before a trip. But you're right, it's easy to just kind of skim them and not really, take it all in.
Exactly. So read those advisories carefully and don't stop there. Go a little deeper. Check out local news sources for the places you're going. It can give you a much better understanding of what's actually happening on the ground.
That's a great point. I bet those local news outlets pick up on things that maybe don't make it into those broader travel advisories.
Exactly. And once you've got a sense of the potential risks, think about some practical steps you can take to make things safer. Share your itinerary with a friend or family member back home and check in with them regularly. You could even use a location sharing app so someone always knows where you are, especially if you're going off the beaten track.
That sounds like a good balance. Staying connected, but still having that sense of adventure. What about transportation? I know that can be tricky in some places.
Oh, it definitely can be. Do your research on transportation options before you get there. Are taxis safe and reliable? Is public transportation well maintained and easy to use? Or are there private car services that might be a better choice, especially at night or in certain areas?
I remember being in a city once where they said to only take official taxis, not the ones just kind of driving around looking for fares. It made me feel so much safer, knowing I was using a reputable service.
It's those little things that can really make a difference. And while we're talking about transportation, let's not forget about scams. Tourists are often targets, especially in crowded places like airports, train stations, or tourist attractions.
Ugh, yeah. I've heard some awful stories about those unofficial taxis, ones that overcharge you or take you the long way around just to rack up the fare.
Exactly. So be cautious if someone comes up to you out of the blue, offering services that sound too good to be true. Stick to official transportation. Or if you need a car, arrange it through your hotel or a trusted travel agency.
What about protecting yourself from theft? Any tips on that?
Well, first of all, think about how you look. Don't be a walking target. By flashing a lot of cash or wearing expensive jewelry, it might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people don't think about it.
Yeah, it's like you're saying, hey, come rob me.
Exactly. Invest in a money belt or a secure bag, keep your valuables close to you, and always, always be aware of your surroundings, especially in crowds. Don't leave bags unattended, and don't hang your purse on the back of your chair at a restaurant.
It's easy to forget those basic things when you're on vacation, trying to relax and have fun.
I know, but those moments when you're not paying attention, that's when you're most vulnerable. And speaking of being vulnerable, let's talk about accommodation. Choose a reputable hotel or guest house in a safe area. And make sure your room has good security, working locks, is safe for your valuables. It's worth checking all that before you settle in.
Definitely. What if you're traveling solo?
Yeah.
Are there any extra precautions you should take?
Solo travel can be amazing, but you really need to be extra aware of your surroundings. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't hesitate to get out of there or ask for help. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
This is making me think about how important it is to choose your travel companions carefully, too.
Absolutely. Traveling with the wrong people can turn a dream trip into a nightmare if you're with a group. Make sure everyone's on the same page about safety and that everyone's comfortable with the level of risk. Open communication is so important for a safe and enjoyable experience.
And it's probably worth mentioning, respecting local customs and laws. Something that might be fine at home could be offensive or even illegal in another country.
Cultural sensitivity is crucial. It's not just about avoiding trouble, it's about being a respectful guest and having a more meaningful experience. Do your research, learn some basic phrases in the local language, and be mindful of how you're acting.
So it sounds like the big takeaway here is awareness. Awareness of your surroundings, the potential risks, and even your own limits.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. It's about being prepared and informed so you can travel confidently and truly enjoy the trip.
Okay, we've covered a lot, from pre-trip research to practical safety tips. But let's be honest, even the most prepared traveler can run into unexpected situations. What happens if, despite all your best efforts, something goes wrong? We'll be right back to talk about that. So we've talked about all the things you can do to avoid travel trouble, but let's be real, sometimes things just happen. The unexpected can really throw a wrench in our plans. What advice do you have for our listeners if they find themselves in a tricky situation while they're abroad?
You know, the most important thing is to try not to panic. I know. Easier said than done when you're in a foreign country and something goes wrong. But staying calm is really key to making good decisions.
Yeah, it's like your brain just goes into overdrive. That fight or flight response kicks in,
Yeah.
and suddenly it's hard to think straight.
Exactly. So take a deep breath, assess the situation, and try to figure out the best way to handle it. Now, if you're facing an immediate threat, like someone's trying to rob you or assault you, your priority is getting to safety as quickly as possible.
Okay, so in that kind of situation, what's the best thing to do? Should you run? Yell for help?
It really depends on the specifics. If you can get away safely, absolutely do it. But if you're trapped, or you think running might make things worse, try to get attention, make noise, yell, anything to scare off the attacker, and let other people know what's going on.
I guess in that kind of situation, common sense goes out the window. You just do what you have to do to protect yourself.
Exactly. Your safety is the most important thing. Now, let's talk about some other problems travelers might face. Things like getting lost, losing your passport, or having a medical emergency. Being prepared for those can make a huge difference.
Yeah, those are definitely things that can disrupt your trip, even if they're not, life or death situations.
Exactly. So here's a tip everyone should follow before their trip. Make copies of all your important documents, passport, visa, travel insurance info, everything. Keep one set with you and leave another set with someone you trust back home.
That's a good idea. So if you lose the originals, you've got a backup?
Exactly. And while you're at it, make sure you have the contact info for your embassy or consulate in the country you're visiting. They can be a lifesaver if you have an emergency, especially if you need help with lost documents, legal issues, or medical problems.
It's like having a safety net when you're far from home. Speaking of medical emergencies, we've talked about travel insurance before, but it's worth mentioning again just how important it is.
I can't stress that enough. Travel insurance isn't just about medical expenses. It can also help with things like emergency evacuation, lost luggage, and all sorts of other unexpected things. Things that could not only ruin your trip, but also cost you a lot of money.
It's one of those things you hope you never have to use, but you're so thankful for it if you do.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about preparedness, I always recommend packing a basic first aid kit. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, just the essentials for minor cuts, scrapes, stomach troubles, that kind of thing.
That's a great tip. I always throw a little first aid kit in my bag, just in case. You never know when you might need a Band-Aid or some pain relievers.
Well, exactly. And here's something else to think about. Communication. What if you lose your phone? Or you're somewhere without cell service?
Oh, that's a good point. We rely so much on our phones these days. It's easy to forget how vulnerable we are without them.
Right. So think about getting a local SIM card for your phone or having an international calling plan. And it never hurts to learn a few basic phrases in the local language, just in case you need to ask for help.
Those are really practical tips. It's amazing how many things we take for granted at home. That can become real challenges when we're traveling.
It's true. We get so used to our routines and our support systems that it can be a shock when those are disrupted. And sometimes the best way to handle a tough situation is to simply ask for help. Don't be afraid to reach out to locals, hotel staff, even other travelers if you need assistance. People are generally kind and helpful, especially if you approach them with respect and a little humility.
That's good to hear. It's easy to get caught up in the fear of the unknown when you're traveling. But it sounds like there's often a lot of support out there if you know where to look.
Definitely. And even if something does go wrong, it doesn't have to ruin your whole trip. A little planning, a positive attitude, and a willingness to adapt can turn a challenge into a memorable adventure.
I love that perspective. It's all about how you handle the unexpected. Sometimes those curveballs end up being the best stories later on.
Exactly. So go out there, explore the world, but do it with awareness, preparedness, and a sense of adventure.
I love that. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world's most dangerous tourist destinations. We've covered a lot today. From the specific risks in different places to practical tips for staying safe and handling emergencies. But remember, this is just a starting point. The most important thing is to do your own research. Be aware of your surroundings and travel smart. And hey, even if you stick to the safest places, there's always a chance for adventure, right? Maybe you'll miss your train and discover an amazing little cafe. Or get lost and stumble upon some hidden gem. So get out there, explore, have fun, but be prepared, stay safe. And who knows, maybe you'll come back with some thrilling stories to tell. Safe travels, everyone.